Okay, let's go through the report. If you've got it printed out, great. If you haven't, don't worry. So basically, the foreword kind of loosely identifies that there's been an epidemiological shift and some kind of increase in kids questioning the way that they feel about their sexed bodies. But basically, it makes no suppositions about why this may be, only that it's a belief system and down to an ideology. So I am welcoming that. Okay, I'm gonna put that out there because obviously that's something which is at least something to work with. So schools do have statutory duties to safeguard and promote the interests and welfare of all children. Okay, so that's a legislative requirement. They have to ensure that that this is in the best interest of all children, and this becomes a bit more of a problem further down for them. There's no model policies offered here, and I think that was a massive issue because if you were working in a school now as a head teacher or a governor, you still really would struggle to know how to implement this. It doesn't highlight the statutory frameworks or the pertinent issues about working with various vulnerable groups, and I really would have liked to have seen that, particularly identifying kids with special educational needs, looked after children, given what I've said in previous videos, illustrating that, we know that certain groups have got epidemiological vulnerabilities, autistic children. Before we get into the kind of meat of it, just playing a little bit of catch up in case you didn't watch any of the other kind of stuff that I ramble about. My belief is that we need a public inquiry because into the structural determinants that have allowed this epidemic of a social and cultural indoctrination, which has driven children into this iatrogenic pathway of harm and mental instability and insanity, frankly. That there is no new sound knowledge that there's a sudden epidemic of unhappy children who are suddenly trans. This is just not true. So they go on to talk about the caste review. They say there's no general duty to allow a child to socially transition. The caste review is clear that social transition is not a neutral act. And schools and colleges should consider how best to fulfill their safeguarding duties towards the child who's making such a request, ensure of that any agreed course of action is in all of their best interests. There will be some requests for a type of social transition that will not be compatible with schools' legal duties. Schools must abide with this. Essentially, what they're doing, which is really madness at this point, okay, is that they've just left the door open and they've again pushed it back to schools to work out how to do this. Schools are not in the position of having insight and understanding, and I'll illustrate where this kind of comes into play. So section 3, safeguarding principles, overarching principles. So we've got 3.1, schools and colleges have statutory duties to safeguard and promote the welfare of all children. Blah, 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 blah. Course of action is in all of their best interests. This may or not be the same as a child's wishes. Again, I said in one of the other videos, so if you allow one child to do this, then all children are affected, okay? If one girl is allowed to pretend that they're a boy, everyone's got to play pretend and affirm, right? This is absolutely nothing like being lesbian, gay, bisexual. No one has to get involved with your sexuality, but everyone has to get involved with a trans identity because we have to play along. Otherwise, the magic disappears and it doesn't have any truth to it. Okay. It's more than just putting on a certain clothes. It's the pronouns, it's the whole pretense of it, the name. So 3.2 talks about bullying. Schools and colleges should be respectful and tolerant places where bullying is never tolerated. Absolutely true. But what happens, right, if one of the kids doesn't want to play along with the dress up game that this person's different sex? What's going to happen? Is that bullying? The magical change of gender is happened. What if that person doesn't comply? Someone in the class. it also is implied further on that this is something that they would expect that people to get on board with, because it says, I have to find the actual point. Oh yeah, I found it, 6.3 under pronouns. In all cases, bullying of any child must not be tolerated. No child should be sanctioned for honest mistakes when adapting to a new way of interacting with another pupil. So basically, we're all got to get on board with the lie. So social transition is for everyone, okay? Seriously, no. We said it's a belief system. It's a contested belief system, but everyone's got to get on board and play pretend. Otherwise, they're going to get punished unless it's an honest mistake. So basically, you know, I've talked before about how incorrectly sexing is particularly problematic for children who've got special educational needs and autism. But you know, there's no reason why anyone who doesn't believe in opposite sex pronouns should be forced to participate anyway. They talk about cautious approaches. You know, what is a cautious approach? How is a head teacher supposed to work out what cautious would, how long would one of these cautious approaches last? What would be, you know, what would be a slow approach? What would be a fast approach? What would be a cautious approach? Interestingly, if you go on to actually do the consultation process, the first page of the consultation process implies that you have a gender identity, the first page. So try not to get, you know, lose the will to live at that point. In the language and terminology section, we have a whole load of gender bending stuff, including gender dysphoria, which I don't agree with, because basically it's a trans captured organization and an ideological term, an ideologically captured medical term. One of the interesting things is that they do say they haven't used a lot of language terms, unlike some of the actual people who are within the gender critical movement, which is slightly amusing. One of the sections that I did want to see in here, which is not in here, which is frustrating, it was around the issue of age of consent, capacity, and diminishing parental responsibility. So I'm disappointed that they didn't put anything in there about that. Right, okay, let's have a look at this document further along. Section 5, responding to requests and engaging parents. I'm calling it 5.1, even though it's not labeled that, but I can't deal with them not writing this properly. Allow for watchful waiting. Wait for a period of time before considering a request to ensure it's a sustained and properly thought through decision. Sorry, further up, action should only be considered after it's explicitly requested by the child and the steps set out have been followed, including engaging with parents. This is unbelievably bad, okay? So as long as the child wants it, it can happen. What does that even mean? I mean, it's just so unbelievably sloppy. Wait for a period of time. How long? 2 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, 1 week, 2 days. A properly thought through decision. Children can't consent to medical interventions. At what point are you deciding that they can consent? What's the nature of that consent? How does that work with diminishing parental responsibility? What is the detail here? How are schools supposed to take that into consideration? Then it goes on. This period of watchful waiting may help to ensure unnecessary action is not undertaken. What is watchful waiting? Allow and watch. This is madness. It's insanity. I mean, when I think about this, I'm kind of like, okay, well, who's assessing this? What are their qualifications? What does this assessment comprise? What is this decision making? What is the competence of these people? How long? All of it, so many different questions. Make parents aware. So if a child requests a change, schools should make parents aware of the situation and can point them to support outside the school environment. For example, pastoral or medical support. Pastoral in brackets. Pastoral. So who's pastoral? I can guarantee these people would be would be considered pastoral. So basically an activist organization. And at that point, the pastoral organization would say things like, do you want an alive son or a dead daughter, or vice versa? Because that's the nonsense and emotional manipulation that they come up with and give, to parents. The other thing about, again, we've got the taking parents' views into consideration. We go back to the activist parent and also what about looked after children? What happened about them? And also, what's the situation with parental consent and diminishing responsibility at that point? What age? This bit about parents, the views of parents should carry weight. What does carrying weight mean? We'd expect parental consent to be required in the vast majority of situations. So, okay, so in some, but not in others. So what does that look like? And how does that work with looked after children from care? And what about activist parents? This isn't a safeguarding first principle. There's one part down at the bottom here, the age of the child. Age is a factor when making decision of this nature. Requests from younger children in primary schools should be treated with greater caution. So again, what does that mean? I mean, it's frightening to think that basically, so not must be, just that you should be more cautious. So they are more vulnerable as they're less able to articulate their feelings, and will have a less mature understanding of a complicated issue. So yes, we know that. So this is a much more detailed requirement for a discussion around consent, as I was just talking about. 5.2.4 is any relevant clinical information that is available should be factored in to your decision making. What does that mean? So basically, if the medical team says one thing, you will take some acknowledgement of it, but you might go your own way. So based on your extensive clinical teaching experience / medical team, what being a school nurse or something like that. 5.2.5, which is the seriousness and context of the request. And whether whether the child has properly considered the impact of their request. Again, coming back to capacity, at what age are you saying there is capacity? Who's assessing it? What are the qualifications of the person who's assessing capacity? What's their training? How are you figuring that in to how this impacts on other issues? What if the child has special educational needs? How are they assessing this if they've been influenced by peers or social media? What's the nature of this assessment that you're expecting teachers and head teachers to undertake? Does the child feel pressured to identify differently because they simply don't align with stereotypes associated with their sex? Well, the whole thing is basically built on that house of sand. So that's just madness. Down to the bottom, the long and short-term impact on the child. We do not yet have definitive evidence on the long and short-term impact of changes on children, but the CAS review interim report is clear that it could have a significant psychological effects on young people. So a safeguarding approach would be to shut the door completely, right? Because we've got enough warning signs to say that rather than being cautious, that basically we should be considering taking those liabilities, potential liabilities very seriously. And closing the door in order to safeguard those children. Also, I'd be really incredibly interested to see what their insurers think of this approach in light of the wooliness and the amount of doors that are being left open here. And then we have this point, 5.2.7, I'm calling it, the impact on other pupils. I think I mentioned this earlier on. If one single child is allowed to undertake a social transition, then basically, the balance of factors is that all children are required to be safe, to be gaslit, because everyone's going to have to go along with the lie that this child is basically in a different sex body and have to call them pronouns or allow them into their spaces, etc. This is interesting over on the page. Following the process for decision making will ensure that all members of staff are supporting the child in a consistent way. Members of staff should not unilaterally adopt any changes, including using a new name or new pronouns, unless or until this has been agreed by the school or college in accordance with the proper procedures. I mean, this is a real problem because you basically, nothing is dealing with activist teachers who are basically flooding out of universities and also already in situ. And also there's nothing in here about the amount of lobby groups. So I'd be interested to know how that's going to be managed. This last point, it just made me laugh. If and when any change has been agreed, the school or college should communicate this to other pupils and staff where it is necessary. This should be done sensitively, without implying contested view around gender identity is fact. Other pupils, parents, teachers may hold protected religious and or other beliefs that conflict with the decision that the school or college has made. These are legitimate views that must be respected. How on earth? I can just see absolute Armageddon. I mean, it's true, but you know, I'm putting my chair of governors hat on, thinking, yeah, that's going to be really easy to sort out. Thanks for that. So going on to 6, handling different information, legal information, registration and name of sex. Brilliant. We've finally got them being told here, again in a non-statutory way, but it should be statutory, that they must record the name and sex of every pupil instead of this absolute nonsense around gender. This is absolutely something which should have been done a long time ago, and it needs to be followed through, because if we don't have accurate data, everything falls apart. So we've got this real jumbled up section on 6.3 pronouns, where they're trying to say you don't have to use pronouns if you don't want to. And then at the bottom, you have this major hiccup, which makes it all fall down, which says, in all cases, bullying of any child must not be tolerated. True. No child should be sanctioned for honest mistakes when adapting to a new way of interacting with a pupil. So basically, that comes back to the fact that they've left the door open for the trans child. So the trans child is going to be wanting trans identifying pronouns. And so no child should be sanctioned for honest mistakes. So basically they're saying that they are going to be expecting that people will, other children will be using those false opposite sex pronouns. So they're going to get in trouble potentially. 6.4, single sex spaces. This is really frustrating, this section. So they start out saying, you know, this is gonna, we want some single sex spaces, great. And then we have this massive mess in the middle where it says, as a default, all children should use the toilet, showers and changing facilities designated for their biological sex. Drum roll, unless it will cause distress for them to do so. So what does that look like? What is distress? How do we measure distress? So if you're a bit, you know, you make a scene, you're upset, you'll get what you want. So isn't that what we've always tried not to do with children? So when they play up, we give them what they want. So basically what you're saying is that single sex spaces won't really exist, because if children play up, then they'll get access to the opposite sex spaces in showers, changing facilities and toilets. Then they go on to talk about the School Premises Act and Education Regulations, which states their requirements to offer single-sex spaces. But obviously, you know, at no point in those parts of the regulations is there any little annex which says, oh, unless kids are a little bit upset. And then we go 6.4.1 in toilets down here. Second paragraph, we have the same thing. If a child does not want to use a toilet designed for their biological sex. So we've gone from the I get out of jail, be distressed, and then you'll get what you want. But now in the toilet situation, we've just got, if you don't want to, you don't have to. So you can use the girls' toilets if you don't want to use the boys. So what's that about? You know, I mean, come on. And then further down in 6.4.2, in 6.42, changing rooms and showers, we have the same thing. If a child does not want to use changing rooms and showers designated for their biological sex, the school or college has considered all the relevant factors outlined above. They may wish to consider whether they can provide or offer the use of an alternative changing or, so basically we've gone from distress, and we've got, if the kid doesn't want something, then, you know, the school might wish to do something about it. I mean, it's literally bonkers. In the boarding section on 6.4.3, we've got boarding in residential accommodation. Second paragraph, no child should be allowed to share a room with a child of the opposite sex. If a child questioning their gender does not wish to share a room with another child of the same sex, where possible, and only after the school has considered relevant factors. What relevant factors? Outlined above. What? You're supposed to be safeguarding everyone. You know, you might want to give them some alternative arrangements. These alternative arrangements should not compromise the safety, comfort, privacy, dignity of the child or of other pupils. For instance, finding a suitable separate room for the pupil. I cannot wait to see that one roll back from all the private schools. That's going to be complete chaos. 6.6, physical education and sport. We have, it's a bit confused, really, the way it's written, because they've already said that primary age children shouldn't be allowed to be transitioning. So why they're now saying, you know, basically mixed participation in sport might be okay. And, you know, obviously as they get older, it might not be as appropriate, but we've already said that we're not allowing primary age children to go down this road. And there's a kind of, it's a bit loose here rather than just saying an absolute no. So I'd have a look at that section and put in your personal preference. Mine is that that girls should be able to do girl sports and boys should be able to do boy sports, and this whole issue of the mixed sex sports happening to quite a reasonable age in primary schools isn't acceptable. But I appreciate that that is variable depending on the school that your child goes to. So I might have a bit of a bias on that. So I'm willing to concede if people think that I'm wrong. But personally, I think that there's a risk. I also don't think that it's fair to those children. I think they should be able to be encouraged and, you know, to attain sporting success in their own sexed sport and enjoy it. I certainly did as a child, and that was absolutely nothing to do with, you know, playing sport against boys. So single sex schools section, I can just see the chaos of this playing out. Basically, what I think will happen, and probably has already been happening, and I don't think this will assist it in any way, is that you could have like a girls' school with some boy who says he's transitioning to be a girl come and try to seek entry into the school and use the Equality Act by way of admission, and obviously there's nothing in this guidance which is going to stop that in its tracks. It's because, you know, again, there are doors open and it's a woolly bit of a guidance. And yeah, have a read of that section too. So just to wrap up, we've got this non-binding, non-statutory draft guidance. And what we're seeing is all of the organisations and lobby groups are piling in the door to the people who they're working with, the different schools, and saying, whatever you do, do not follow the Department for Education's guidance. And, you know, hysteria, you'll be letting down all of these children, you know, they'll all, something awful will happen to them all. And basically there are, you know, numerous different examples of activists, which I'll kind of put up a couple of. We've got Mermaids being one of them. They've put out a template letter that schools can use. which again, is interesting. I mean, these guys don't really care about the level of factual stuff that they throw at schools, but the focus here is that they are using the Equality Act as the stick to beat schools with, rather than reminding them about their statutory responsibilities with all the different safeguarding bits of legislation. Yeah, and basically, unless the Department for Education takes some very, very swift action and makes this a statutory piece of work following the consultation. That's why it's absolutely so important for you all to take part in it and to really take 10 minutes. You don't have to do it all at once. You've got, I'm sort of 3/4 of the way through mine because I wanted to have a look at it and see if it, what it was like, so that I could report back to you. It's really very simple to do. So I will encourage you to do that. I'll try and put a link below to it. And the more of us who get involved in it, the better. I hope this has been of some value, and I'll speak to you again soon.